Imagine a man born into poverty, becoming a master of counterfeiting, so skilled that he attracted the wrath of Isaac Newton, leading him to the gallows. William Chaloner, the counterfeiter who challenged a genius and lost. How did a man of humble origins amass a fortune through deceit and counterfeiting, and what led to his fatal encounter with justice? Con artist, deceiver, serial counterfeiter, this is the story of William Chaloner and how Isaac Newton sentenced him to the gallows. Growing up in 17th century Birmingham was no easy task, especially for someone like William Chaloner. The streets, bustling with merchants, craftsmen, and laborers, were a hub of activity, and also a reflection of the inequality and suffering of the less fortunate. In these streets, Chaloner learned about inequality and injustice from an early age. Without access to formal education, Chaloner was forced to learn from life itself. His first teachers were the con artists and petty criminals lurking in the darkest corners of Birmingham. He quickly learned that wit and cunning could be more valuable than gold in a world where everything was bought and sold. This was a time when the ability to deceive often meant the difference between surviving and falling. Have you ever thought about the thin line separating an act of survival from one of criminality? Soon, Chaloner began to conduct his own small scams. He started with simple tricks, like selling fake objects as if they were genuine. Upon arriving in London, Chaloner found himself in an entirely different world. The city was a hub of trade and culture, a place where deception and corruption were commonplace. Here, he began to associate with other counterfeiters and criminals, learning more sophisticated techniques and starting to build his reputation in the London underworld. Imagine how Chaloner must have felt discovering a world where his skills were not only useful, but also valued and rewarded. In the dark taverns and hidden alleys of London, William Chaloner began his true education in the art of counterfeiting. He surrounded himself with the best in the trade, absorbing knowledge about metals, coinage, and engraving. It was a world where the slightest detail could mean the difference between a convincing coin and complete failure. He soon realized that coin counterfeiting was a lucrative business. He began to study the coins of the time, their designs, and the metals used in their fabrication. His ability to mimic these coins rapidly improved, and soon he was producing forgeries that deceived even the most seasoned experts. Chaloner quickly stood out for his ability to replicate the coins of the era. He studied every detail, from their weight to the sound they made when dropped. But his true talent lay in his capacity to imitate the intricate designs engraved on the coins, a skill that made him one of the best counterfeiters in the world. What really set Chaloner apart from other counterfeiters was his willingness to innovate. He experimented with different alloys and minting techniques, always seeking to improve the quality of his forgeries. He even created his own tools and molds, which allowed him greater precision in his work. Chaloner didn't limit himself to coins. He also ventured into forging government documents, like bonds and patents. Here, his skill in imitating handwriting and official seals elevated him to a new level of criminality. These crimes were much bolder and riskier, but also far more profitable. Chaloner was not only skilled with his hands, he also had a special talent for dealing with people. He began to form a network that included not just other criminals, but also influential individuals who, lured by profit, turned a blind eye to the illegality of his activities. As he became bolder in his forgeries, the risk of getting caught also increased. Authorities started to take notice of his activities, and attempts to capture him began. But he always seemed to be one step ahead, using his wit and his network of contacts to evade justice. Over time, the name William Chaloner became synonymous with counterfeiting. His reputation grew to such an extent that he became known not just among criminals, but also in society at large. However, with fame came greater scrutiny from the authorities, which eventually led to his confrontation with Isaac Newton. As William Chaloner established himself in the world of counterfeiting, his methods became more sophisticated. Not content with simple forgeries, he began to devise more complex scams involving technical skill and a deep understanding of human psychology. One of Chaloner's strategies was his personal transformation. He presented himself as a gentleman, a respectable man. This facade allowed him access to higher social circles, where his deceits found new victims, often more willing to believe in someone who appeared to be one of their own. The silver coins of that era, especially those hand-struck before 1662, had a serious problem. People clipped the edges to keep a bit of silver. Each coin gradually lost weight, and therefore, value. The situation was so bad that these coins were virtually useless for buying bread abroad. The Royal Mint, akin to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, took action and began producing machine-made coins after 1662. These had milled and decorated edges, designed to prevent clipping. But, as in any good story, a new problem emerged: counterfeiting. And believe me, counterfeiting was on another level. There were coins made in fake molds, stamped with fake dies. By 1696, 10% of the coins in circulation were counterfeit. Now here's the third problem. English currency was worth more as silver in Paris or Amsterdam than as coinage in London. So many people melted down these coins and sold them abroad. It was a lucrative business. Naturally, this was a headache for the government, which had to pass new laws and create the Bank of England to try and control the chaos. In the midst of this mess, our main character emerges, William Chaloner. He learned from Patrick Coffey, a goldsmith, how to make those milled edges and to counterfeit coins as if it were child's play. Along with Thomas Taylor, a master engraver, he began producing fake coins that were virtually indistinguishable from the real ones. Chaloner became so adept at his craft that he began living like a true gentleman. He bought a house in Knightsbridge, then a semi-rural suburb, and even had his own carriage. He paraded through life as if he were royalty. But as in every good crime story, there's always a hero. In this case, it was none other than Isaac Newton. Yes, the same man known for the apple and gravity. Newton was in charge of the Royal Mint and set out to catch these counterfeiters. Chaloner, for his part, didn't sit idle. He continued with his scams and even offered his services to the Parliament and the Mint, pretending to be a respectable citizen. An old associate betrayed him, and Chaloner had to flee. But that didn't stop him, and he continued counterfeiting coins with new techniques and allies. The Mint began its own investigations, and things turned ugly for our friend. By January 1696, Chaloner was in Newgate prison, charged with a serious crime. Many minor criminals began to inform on him. From prison, Chaloner attempted one last trick. He wrote to Charles Montague about a supposed conspiracy in the Royal Mint. He even testified before an investigation committee about the internal crimes of the Mint. He accused employees of minting fake guineas and sending dies abroad for coinage. He even boasted privately of having benefited from these practices. But fate had other plans. In Parliament, Isaac Newton, by then in charge of the Royal Mint, recognized Chaloner, leading to his arrest. Chaloner tried to bribe Thomas Holloway, a key witness, to disappear, but his plan failed. After 7 weeks, he was released and began his next scam. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, was the country's new financial jewel. Its purpose was to accept deposits from the wealthy and loan them to the government. In May 1695, they introduced $100 banknotes, printed on special paper to prevent counterfeiting. But of course, for a counterfeiter of Chaloner's caliber, this was just a new opportunity. Chaloner, always one step ahead, obtained similar paper in his Knightsbridge home and began printing his own versions of the 100 notes. The most astonishing part was that at that time, forging these notes was not yet considered a serious crime. However, the Bank of England soon caught onto the scam. In August 1695, they discovered a counterfeit note and traced the paper back to a printer who had been deceived by Chaloner into watermarking the paper. Chaloner, instead of fleeing or hiding, voluntarily turned himself into the bank. He provided his unused paper and named other conspirators to gain credibility. He exposed a major fraud against the bank, in which he himself was involved. For his efforts, he received a formal thank you from the Bank of England, a reward of £200 sterling, and most incredibly, he kept all his earnings from the counterfeiting. But he didn't stop there. He had taught a certain Aubrey Price how to forge the new treasury bills, altering the denominations after removing the old ink with a liquid Chaloner had invented. Price was caught, tried at Old Bailey, and sentenced to death. He was hanged in Tyburn in June 1698. Chaloner was a master at manipulating people. He used his charisma and ability to read others to convince them he was trustworthy. This skill allowed him to maintain his deceits even when under suspicion. Before continuing, if you enjoy my content and would like to support me, I would greatly appreciate if you could like this video, comment, and most importantly, share it with others. This helps a lot in my work. Thank you. And now, let's continue. At the height of his career, William Chaloner had established himself as one of the most skilled and daring counterfeiters of his time. His wealth and status, built on a mountain of deceit and falsehoods, allowed him to live a life of luxury that once seemed unattainable for a man of his humble beginnings. He lived in a lavish house, wore fine clothes, and mingled with members of high society, many of whom had no idea of the true nature of his activities. Chaloner had made a name for himself in the world of crime while simultaneously infiltrating London society. His ability to blend in with the elite provided him with new opportunities for his scams. However, this rise brought greater scrutiny from the authorities, who began to close in on his illicit activities. Challoner openly challenged the mint, accusing it of being unable to stop the proliferation of counterfeit coins, an irony given his own involvement in creating such forgeries. This act of provocation demonstrated his confidence and belief that he could outsmart the law indefinitely. His fate took a decisive turn with the arrival of Isaac Newton at the mint. Newton, known for his brilliance in science, took the issue of counterfeiting very seriously and soon identified Challoner as a primary target. The battle of wits between these two men marked a turning point in Challoner's life. Challoner tried by all means to stay one step ahead of Newton and the authorities. He used all his skills and contacts to evade capture, but Newton was equally determined. This pursuit turned into a cat-and-mouse game, where each of Challoner's moves was meticulously analyzed and countered by Newton. Despite all his efforts, Challoner's web of deceit began to unravel, evidence against him mounted, and his arrest became increasingly inevitable. William Challoner met his final fate at the hands of Sir Isaac Newton and the English justice system. In late October, before the end of the 17th century, Challoner was once again arrested and imprisoned in Newgate. Newton, who had become a relentless counterfeit hunter, dedicated himself fully to the investigation of Challoner. Challoner's trial was a spectacle in itself. It was held at Old Bailey on March 3rd, with Sir Salathiel Lovell, known for his severity, presiding as judge. Challoner, without prior knowledge of Newton's case or access to evidence or witnesses, had to defend himself alone. He faced charges of treason for coining French pistols, crowns, and half-crowns. Newton presented a series of witnesses who unraveled Challoner's entire criminal career. From a goldsmith's wife to an engraver's, they all contributed key pieces that revealed the extent of Challoner's counterfeiting operations. While awaiting his trial in Newgate, Challoner attempted a desperate strategy, feigning insanity. But his act did not fool Newton. At the trial, Challoner resorted to insults and accusations of perjury, claiming that the charges were outside the jurisdiction of the Middlesex Sessions, but his efforts were in vain. The jury needed only a few minutes to find him guilty. Sentenced the following day, Challoner spent his last weeks writing letters to Newton and Judge Railton. His words oscillated between aggression, pleading, and rambling, but he received no response. His last letter to Newton was a desperate plea for mercy, a request to save him from the fate he had forged for himself. But not even the eloquence of his words could change his fate. On March 22, 1699, Challoner was taken to the gallows at Tyburn. His death was as dramatic as his life, writhing in the hanged man's dance, while the crowd watched. After his execution, his body was publicly disemboweled, a macabre end for a man of exceptional but misguided talents. William Challoner knew how to camouflage himself among London's elite, but imagine being the boss of crime while everyone thinks you're dedicated to catching criminals. Here I leave the story of John Law. Subscribe and like to support my work.